Welcome to Power Up Your Practice, the go-to podcast for law firm owners and managing attorneys working on the business, not in it. I'm Ruby Powers, your guide into the heart of law practice management, bringing your insights from leading legal minds, trailblazing attorneys, and expert guests who provide practical perspectives on running your firm more effectively and efficiently. And before we dive in, I'm thrilled to announce that my latest book, Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with actionable advice for growing a successful law firm. Be sure to grab your copy today. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and resources. And if you're enjoying this podcast, we love your reviews. They help us reach more attorneys like you who are striving to build the practice of their dreams. Prepare to open your mind, be inspired, and power up your practice to the next level. I'm excited to have today's guest, JoAnn Hathaway. She has a wide-ranging background spanning legal, liability claims and risk management, legal administration, and state bar association practice management advising. We got to know each other through the ABA Law Practice Division, different committees, and seeing each other through the different activities through the ABA. But she's a registered professional liability underwriter, a cyber professional liability practitioner, author of the ABA publication Legal Malpractice Insurance in 1 Hour for Lawyers, and the co-host of the State Bar of Michigan's On Balance podcast. And we're so excited to have you here, JoAnn. Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Ruby. This is very exciting. I'm happy to talk to you.
Well, you have such a wealth of knowledge. It's sort of hard to decide what topic to cover today. But I think we decided that what we'd like to talk about would be the setting up and building a remote practice. And for those who maybe you have some hybrid practice, like how to take it up a notch, especially for those who've maybe started doing this maybe 5 years ago during the pandemic, but like maybe you could reevaluate your setup and how can you do it better. But there's also so many, I know probably the same for you, consulting and those I've talked to, many people who are starting their practices are just going straight to being 100% remote. But I guess, what are you starting to see in the trends and evolution of the remote practice?
Yeah, I'm seeing everything all over the board. Remote practice wasn't a totally new concept at the time COVID hit, in my opinion. There were some people that were totally remote, and so it wasn't anything new. But I know in Michigan, when COVID hit, we were one of the 12 states considered non-essential, and our members were not very happy about that. And I know, Ruby, you experienced that in Texas too, because if I'm not mistaken, I think Texas was one of those states that also was considered non-essential, or lawyers had to stay at home, basically. So it seemed to happen pretty much overnight, and it was a little bit of chaos. So it was a really bad situation because people were suddenly forced to work from home, as we all know, without any planning whatsoever. And even though they had, periodically worked from home, maybe if they had a childcare issue or a sick child or whatever it was, they didn't have the full setup. It was basically them bringing their laptop home and working at the kitchen counter and then going back to the office the next day to support staff. So it was a totally different thing. And now I think it is one of the good things that has come out of COVID, if you can say there's anything good about it, is that people have learned how to work remotely. They're more comfortable with it now, and there can be a lot of advantages to it. So there are some folks that are totally remote, some that are working hybrid. As you mentioned, they're going in sometimes, and then sometimes they're working from home. So that's what I'm seeing. But a lot of people, particularly solos, are working fully remote.
It's interesting. I had to actually Google it because when I was in that 2020, there would be times where we were running around in Texas as if like COVID wasn't happening. I think Florida and Texas were sort of like that. And then I'd be talking to my colleagues on calls in the UK or the East Coast, the West Coast, and they were on complete lockdown. But Texas attorneys were considered essential. So I think a lot of people tried to do business as usual. weren't forced to truly go remote, like you're mentioning in the states that were considered not essential. But I think that just sort of made it all those attorneys having to learn how to make it work. And then for me, for example, I think a lot of people might have heard my story. I ran my law firm from Dubai in 2011, 2012. And because I had that experience where I really had to be remote, I learned so much so that when the pandemic happened, we were easily able to go remote. And then now to this day, we have a nice hybrid situation for our US based team and fully remote for our assistants abroad. But yeah, I could see how it really differed state to state on that finding of essential or non-essential.
And for some reason, I was thinking you were in the same ranks as Michigan and Texas. So I stand corrected. Thank you for steering me in the right direction on that. One thing that I've noticed too, since people are going remote, clients are more comfortable with it now too, and they know how to deal with it. And also, I think, it's not just the attorneys and staff that are obviously more comfortable with it now, but also the technology companies and vendors have really adapted, and they have really put forth, other platforms and more workflows and, just things that people can use in their remote practice. And so, there's been adoption in many different ways.
So if let's say you you're starting out, what are some of the key things to think about when you're starting that remote practice?
Yeah, well, there's obviously some practical steps for setting up an effective remote office environment. I mean, there are so many components to it. There's a technology, there's a wellness, and we can get into that. But just the focus on starting it up, you really want a designated, dedicated workspace that's quiet and organized. I know when I started, I mentioned the kitchen counter, right? I worked for a while when I first started working remotely at my island in my kitchen. And, when you're seeing personal items around and you don't have a dedicated space, it's just more distracting until you really get used to it. And I finally created one of my rooms into a totally designated workspace. And I absolutely love it because at night I can go and close the door. I do come back in sometimes and, but when it's not right in front of you, you're able to set, some boundaries. And that goes along with the wellness too. And obviously you need to invest in reliable hardware and software, computer, webcam, headset, and we can go into more about that if you'd like to with the necessary technologies or what's available. And of course, you want to be comfortable. So invest in some ergonomic furniture to be comfortable and, for your health. Um, and establish a daily routine. That's what I think is extremely important, is to try and maintain structure and productivity so you're really being efficient. And I also think, I worked a lot in risk management, and I go into law firms sometimes as mandated by the disciplinary commission. And, I see that people don't have risk management practices in place. So there's obviously cybersecurity, but what I'm getting at is just identify if you need help, where can you get it? Know where, when, how, and to whom to reach out for support and help in various areas of your practice. So those are just kind of some, 5 areas that I would start with, Ruby.
So let's talk about maybe the address, because I think some people, when I did the remote thing, I didn't want to use my home address. I used a UPS store address because it had like suite F130, but it was just basically my box. And
And I just felt like, ooh, I feel like it's an office, but it was a mail delivery service. I maybe different. I don't know. Sometimes states have different rules on the address, or also making sure who's going to be monitoring, how quickly you're going to be how much you're going to be checking it. I think it's probably a good rule of thumb not to use your home address. The other thing is addresses also affect like the Google My Business, your account, and I also had issues when I had a remote executive suite location that had too many law firms or businesses at the same address, and Google was giving me a hard time. But there's a lot of different things to think about when you talk about the address. Any other suggestions or thoughts on that?
Yeah, you hit on a lot on a lot right there. And as you indicated too, every state bar is different with their requirements about whether they require you to have an address on file. And so obviously I can't speak to other states, but as far as I you're spot on with what I recommend is with UPS or FedEx, you can get the deliveries there and you have a physical address as far as your deliveries. And so you don't have to, be putting your home address out there. So that is what I typically recommend.
And then if you don't have in person, if you I think some people put in like by appointment only as well, like, or to clarify if that's more of a mailing location so that people don't just show up at whatever that address is. If they're more.
Yes. Yes. And thank you for pointing that out. That's not something that I thought about too much. And so it sounds like you can speak to that. And maybe having had experienced it, I have not had, when I've been consulting with attorneys, many people indicate that they had that happen. And I think a lot of it is because, and tell me what you're doing, but I know a lot of people, a lot of the attorneys now are having basically the iCal where people can schedule their own appointments. So it's not like a storefront where people are just walking by and think, I'm going to stop in. So
I think it also, like, before we started, we were talking, I mentioned that in field of immigration, there's a handful of clients that they prefer to come in person. And so that's the reason why my practice is still hybrid. I still have an office front because not all of USCIS filings can be done electronically yet. We still really rely on our mail is so essential. Many things have been moving remote, but it's online filing, but not 100%. So I think having this conversation, there's a couple of key points. One is your practice area and how much is it capable of being remote? Do you have to go in person for something? Filings, court, interviews, what have you. And then I think the other thing is that your avatar of your client. What are you wanting to be open to the in-person attendance or showing up or what have you? Or do you want to be truly remote? No, don't come in. There isn't a place for you to be.
right. And I think I mentioned that I think that many clients are now familiar with, the remote scenario and connecting over different platforms digitally. However, there are so many clients who, as you pointed out, they're not like that as far as feeling comfortable with it. And so, and I mean, I think about probate a lot. And so it, maybe your more elderly clients who, really, really aren't tech savvy. And they really, they're so used to that face to face. But one thing to think about too is I know a lot of people, they don't want to have a designated workspace. They do want to be fully remote, but they rent conference rooms periodically through like Regis, and there are so many different opportunities like that. And many of these facilities have a range of sizes and amenities and pricing options. So, if you really educate your clients as to what you have available, if they want to meet, you can certainly schedule that. And for those prospective clients who you don't want to just stop in, encourage them to, fill out a form on the website or pick a time on the calendar to have an initial consultation.
Do you have any suggestions for, I think there are some services out there that can either, well, in immigration, we still, like I was saying, we still have to mail paper packets out. And so I think that's the one thing that slows some people down from having 100% remote, that they have to have like a part-time assistant of some sort, or maybe team up with another firm to be able to just have, boots on the ground to print, package, and mail. But like services and or suggestions for that scenario where you and I know that the other thing is that a lot of those executive suite situations do have a service that they can scan your mail to you. But I think the mail part and the packages is besides the clientele are some of the things that hold some people back from being 100% remote.
Yeah. I know that you can certainly get notifications through FedEx, so you can set that up through FedEx and UPS to know when you have a package that's going to be delivered. So wherever you've designated that it be delivered, you will have notification. That would be my recommendation on that. And of course, you can do that with the United States Postal Service as well.
Yeah, that's a good tip. So I think one of the things I realized was that I was just doing that, like putting a really uncomfortable chair in front of a place and just starting to work, or working at the dining room table and what have you. So I've upgraded a little bit. Like at my home, I have like a nicer chair, so that's good. Finally invested in that, and then we have like a little, I don't know, like a little partition that we put around the desk so that there's no chance somebody's walking around or something like that in the back, and sort of creates more of a separation. But I don't have an extra room that I can make into my office at my house. But there will be times where I'll be, I need to, work from home before going somewhere else that's in person or something. But I do think the idea of having a dedicated space that where your lighting, your acoustics are good, having more of that privacy, and sort of, it also mentally helps to be able to separate your space as well. Any other suggestions or tips that you share in building up your home office?
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot easier if you don't have a lot of other people in the household, particularly little ones where you have a lot of distractions. It's much easier to, again, we're talking about being set up at the kitchen island or wherever you choose if you don't have a dedicated office. So, I do think a lot of it is just discipline too. I know that it took me a while to not look at the dishes and think, oh, I'll just get up and do the dishes, or I'll do this. And, then you start to bifurcate, right? And, there's no such thing as multitasking, it's switch tasking. And I think we've all heard the studies about how long it takes once you switch task to get back and then refocus on what you were doing previously. So, it certainly can be done, but it's on a case by case basis. I think, it's really important to focus on the essential tools and technologies that I think every remote law office should have in place. And as a practice management advisor, we all have different opinions. Okay. There are about 30 different practice management advisors in North America. We all have different opinions on software and best practices. I mean, we're in alignment for the most part, but one of the top things is remote or in office. get practice management software. It is a buyer's market, and it has been for a long time. And if you don't know what practice management software is, which obviously I know you do, Ruby, but historically it was referred to as case management software because it was basically developed for litigators, and but now it's customizable depending on the platform, and it's helpful in any different practice area. So I really recommend practice management software, and billing and accounting software. And most practice management software applications have billing software baked right in. One thing that I love is that within the last couple of years, a lot of the practice management software vendors are now getting accounting baked right into the practice management software. And I love it because before, a lot of them linked to like QuickBooks and several other different platforms, and they still can if you want to use QuickBooks or another platform. But they also, a lot of them have it baked in. So that's great. Productivity software, I recommend, but anyway, my recommendation, but it's Microsoft 365. There's so much that you can do in Microsoft 365. So good productivity software. Of course, you need secure cloud storage. You can get that in Microsoft 365. E-signature platforms. Again, a lot of these are linked to or baked into practice management software. You get encrypted mail and messaging. And of course, you need your video conferencing software. We all know initially everybody was Zooming, right? And it's funny because I saw Zoom years ago at Tech Show, and I thought it was the coolest thing the first year it came out. And then suddenly it's like, why didn't I buy stock in Zoom? Anyway, but also client.
Yeah, because I'm sorry, Ayla, I was on a whole bunch of nationwide committees with Ayla before the pandemic, and we were using Zoom. It must have been because they learned about it at ABA Tech Show some year. But that's a good point, because before, when I ran my law firm from Dubai, I had to use Skype. But Zoom, just seemed to be a lot more capable with all its features when it came out later. I mean, it didn't exist when I was running my law firm from Dubai. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and there's so much. I mean, it's got an AI assistant now and transcription, and it's hard to keep up. So because it can do so much and continually adding new features. Client portals are really important. A lot of the practice management software platforms have client portals in them. And so that's a wonderful security and wonderful client service feature that you can have. And of course, you need your backup. I would like to point out one of the things that I think is well known is that lawyers tend not to get training in their applications. And so I see lawyers go out and get, do all this, the demos and getting the latest and the greatest, but then they don't get training in it. So maybe they're using it max to 40% of what it can do. And so what do? They think, oh, this doesn't do what I want it to do. And so they go out and they get more software and they slap it on. And then that becomes even more cumbersome. So just a few tips with regard to technology. And don't forget, too, that there's that requirement of tech competence. And with many having the requirement of, to include cybersecurity. So there are 40 states now, as of July 2025, that have the duty of tech competence. And so just a couple tips with regard to software. My opinion, less is better. Again, the practice management software can do so much, and it can link to so much that you may already have. I do recommend looking for the all-in-ones and take time for demos. There's, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many options out there today. But if you sit down for a demo, you start to know what you want to look for, and then you can compare and contrast as you sit down with other demos. So that's my 2 cents on tools and technologies.
Are you finding yourself overwhelmed with handling phone calls and spending endless hours on consultations that just don't qualify? Well, let me introduce you to Staffy Live, your ultimate solution for 24/7 live receptionist and intake services tailored specifically for law firms. Now picture this: empathetic, truly bilingual specialists who understand the intricacies of client care and are experts at asking all the right questions to qualifying callers efficiently. Now that with Staffy Live, you'll feel like you have a trusted partner by your side, ensuring only qualified consultations make it on your calendar and providing valuable follow-ups when needed. As someone who's been using Staffy Live for my own law firm, I couldn't be happier. And I guess what Staffy Live is now offering, a generous 15-day free trial with no strings attached. You can head over to staffy.cc. That's stafi.cc and click Get Started. And don't forget to use the code RUBY, RUBY. Your future self will thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I believe that, I think we know that from our work in law practice management, that a lot of the practice management programs are out there, and I still use the word case management software a lot, but just out of habit. But a lot of them are trying to be an all-in-one and that like top-down type of vertical, where from the intake to the contract to the maybe a newsletter, like a CRM component, to case management notes, connecting to billing and your accounting software and client portals, etc. And so you're right. That seems to be a trend over the last handful of years. But then there's also that these programs are always getting better and adding features along at the same time. So doing an audit on a regular basis as to what programs you need, because maybe you're saving money by not paying for rent, because as much rent, or because you're working from home and your remote office and your team is as well. But then you're spending, it's sort of starting to add up in the software space, and all the different programs, and being aware of which programs you really need. And I completely agree with what you said about a lot of attorneys and maybe their team members as well are not using the programs that they're paying for to the fullest. And often, you're right, we'll just say we're upset with it, but instead of going and getting trained, and with them always adding features, and if you don't get trained, it's like it could be getting down to you're only using 20% or something like that at some point, or less. But you're right, those are all. And I think the other key point about less programs the better, because just thinking about all the different programs that you have to click up and down and connect and add your notes here and there, it goes a lot to that switch tasking. Like if you're having to be in so many different programs, there's so much friction. So I think that's the best approach to when you're doing your audit. How can you have less programs do the same amount of work, so that you could be paying for less programs, but also having to have less transition time from one software to the next. Yeah, all good key points. Just constant. It's good to echo those things, because those are what we're living. And even though we might have heard that before, just going back and saying, are we implementing this good piece of advice?
Yeah, it's interesting to mention, not using software to its fullest optimization. And I was talking to a legal technologist who goes into law firms every day, all the time. And I was mentioning the 40% in my assessment. And he said, I think that's being very generous. He said, we're like, I think it's more like 25%. And so it's interesting. And I know, having seen software evolve over the years, I was at the State Bar of Michigan for having just retired last week for 20 years. And I know when I started in the practice management department there were basically 3, maybe 4 practice management applications. There was no such thing as cloud. They were all premise based. And you had to have your server, and you had to, but it has evolved so much. And the point that I'm making here is, back then, if you had a license, you had to wait till the next version came out, right? Then the next, and then you had to buy it. And then So there were no changes to it. But now with cloud, I mean, you log in every day and it's like, oh, now it does this and it does that. And, they're continually making changes. So it's something that you really have to kind of keep up on what's new and read the notices, because a new feature may come on board and you might not even be aware of it, and you don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know to go out and get training. So that is one of the challenges that I had as a practice management advisor. Was there so many applications out there, and to keep abreast, to help the members, know what can do what, and Clio now can, it's got their AI, and a couple of years ago, suddenly they could build your website for you, and so it just, there's a lot to keep up with, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And I think just a subtle plug, this is a great place to talk about ABA Tech Show, March 2026 in Chicago. But all in the expo hall, a lot of these vendors are there, and it's like a kid in a candy store. You can go run around and demo. And a lot of times you might be talking with the founder potentially, or and then they'll be bringing the people, if it's not a legal tech specific vendor, they'll bring those salespeople, those people who know that space better in the legal tech space. But anyway, you can do the demos, you can ask a lot of questions, and you can roam along the halls and sort of connect dots, like, oh, if I had that program, or that program is a lot like that program. But you're right. I think it also brings to light the need to, as if you're the owner, managing attorney, partner for your practice, you really need to know what programs you're buying, and make sure you have the buy-in, but then also training your team at the same time. One thing I was wanting to ask you, and I didn't like pre warn you about it, but I'm really curious, like, what are some of the top themes of all the consulting that you've done, like, what are some of the top themes that you hear are the problems that attorneys are facing the most? If you're willing to share.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, primarily, we at the State Bar of Michigan, as do most of the practice management programs in North America, they have a helpline. So people do call in with, what do I need, or what do you recommend for this? And I almost don't want to say that there is a common, or I almost want to say that there is not a common theme necessarily, because there are so many questions. What I can tell you is, when I do go into law firms and I do a complete consultation, it is usually at the request of the disciplinary agency. Mm-hmm. And that's because the agency found that the act, error, or omission, whichever it was that got the individual into trouble, emanated from a practice management issue. Hence, they might order them to have a practice management consultation. And I would say that the most troublesome area, or where people need the help most, is with trust accounting. That's where they get into trouble most, and they have poor billing and accounting practices, and they don't actually understand necessarily trust accounts and where money should be placed. And that's particularly a problem, I think, within the last 5 to maybe even 10 years out, because there's so many, we talk about hybrid offices, there's so many different types of hybrid billings. And, you've got the flat fees, and then you've got the flat fee non-refundable retainer, and then you've got the refundable retainer, and then you've got the blend, and there's so many things. So people are getting into trouble, with regard to their accounting practices and their trust accounting.
Well, it is. I can imagine there's just so much that might be hard to have just a few things, but you're right. There is a lot to juggle when you have your practice, and when you're building it up, you have to wear so many hats to be able to make it run before you can grow and hire more team and more help to help support you. So I'm glad that there are PMAs and there's consultants and advisors and all those resources out there for law firm owners and managing attorneys and partners to be able to have those resources. And I think that's a key point, like knowing when to ask for help. Like it's good that there's resources out there, just like the podcast and books and things like that. So that's awesome. Well, before I start asking you my favorite rapid questions at the end, I know that you had a chance to look at Power Up Your Practice, and so the book. And so I was just wondering if you had any comments, thoughts, initial impressions that you wanted to share.
Yes. And Ruby, I thank you so much for sharing that publication with me that you authored and making me aware of it, because I actually was on publishing board for ABA Law Practice Division for several years. And I've seen a lot of practice management books that are out there, and there's several through the ABA and elsewhere as well. But I was blown away when I got this publication, and I wish everybody had it in hand, because it is the Bible of practice management, technology, everything that comes under the umbrella of running your law practice. I cannot recommend it enough, and kudos to you for making that available.
Well, that means so much to me coming from you. I know a fellow author and having so much experience in this space, and you being a PMA and having seen a lot of resources, as well as being on the ABA book publishing board in the past. And so I've relied on ABA books in the past for my business, and I'm really grateful. I was on the board as well for a while as well, and seeing all those different resources, it is a way to give back. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I was just saying, like, I'm so glad I wrote it when I did, because there's there's a lot going on in my practice field right now that I wouldn't have had the bandwidth to do that at this moment. Okay, well, now we go into the questions as we wrap up. What is your favorite board game or card game?
I've always been a big fan of euchre
Okay.
as my card game. And so that would be my answer for that one, Ruby.
All right. I think I've heard that one a couple of times, but I think is that all like regional too, to where you are in the US? Is that like
I never knew that it was, but I think it's kind of a Midwestern thing, particularly the Upper Peninsula in Michigan.
Yeah.
But it is more of a mid. I didn't realize that for years and years. I do want to say, talking about board games, though, I got a board game a little while ago, and I didn't mention it because I can't say it's my favorite because I haven't played it yet. But it's traveling the national parks. It looks so cool. Yeah. And so, I'm anxious to get into that.
We might have bought that and not played it yet, so I need to get on top of that. But yeah, I really love games. So like when people tell me their answer, I'm like, it really tells me a lot about a person. So especially if I know.
Well, I got that one because my daughter is really, she lives in California, and she's really getting into camping the national parks out there. So I'm like, I should get this, and we can play it when she comes home. So
I wonder, I feel like California has the most amount of parks. I might be right, but there's a ton of them. Like, and we went to like 3 or 4, and we didn't even hit up the north and the south yet. So I feel like I've gone to about 23 of the 65, and we're about to go.
Oh my gosh, you're way beyond me. We have state parks here in Michigan. Well, I think we have a couple anyway, but so I'm a state park camper, but not a national park camper yet.
Well, a lot of state parks can sometimes, just be those little hidden gems that haven't been upgraded yet. But so those are good too. Okay, what would you consider your superpower?
This sounds kind of boring, but I think organization, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing though, because sometimes I organize to organize and I have so many lists and things I can't, anyway. So, but I would say organization is my superpower.
Got it. Well, I mean, it's if you got it, use it. And there's a lot of people who need it, who aren't that organized. So what would you consider is a habit that contributes to your success?
I would say if I had to pick one, and this is relatively new for me, is meditation. I am
Ooh,
trying to make a habit of that, and I found that it really helps me stay focused and yeah, and helps again with focus and anxiety and so many things. So
that's
that
awesome.
would
I
be
need
my
to get
answer for that one. Yeah.
I have that on my to-do list to get better at it. I was talking to someone recently who does it 1 hour a day, and I was like, wow. And
1 hour a
yeah,
day?
mhm.
That's a lot.
They're
Wow.
not an
I'm impressed.
attorney, but they're legal tech. They're like a tech specialist. But yeah, I was really impressed by that. I mean, I know it takes a while to build up to that. It takes probably a while. Anyway, what would be a favorite? What's a favorite book or podcast that you would definitely suggest to our listeners? Or even it doesn't have to be because of law practice management. It could be something else too.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you. It's funny you should mention the law practice management because I'm going to actually give you two answers. Any if people aren't aware of Legal Talk Network, it is such a wonderful repository of approximately, oh my goodness, about 30 different legal related podcast all in. It's one-stop shopping and it is absolutely wonderful. So from a work perspective, that is what I would recommend, that grouping of podcasts, and of course your podcast too, Ruby. And also last a couple of years ago when I was at CleoCon, one of the keynotes was Mel Robbins. I don't know if
Oh,
you're familiar with her, but she has a podcast and she has so many followers, you can't believe it. And I have really gravitated toward listening to her podcast as well. They're excellent.
oh, that's awesome. I wasn't at that one, but I was at the one of the ones that had James Clear on the atomic habits, and I think after hearing his keynote, that's when I think I decided to add that what's a habit that contributes to your success, because I think a lot of times people they don't see the behind the scenes, and so I just want to, it sort of like opens up like what is it people are doing that's making them awesome, that contributes to making them awesome. So no, that's great. It's fun when you get to see like a keynote like that, and then it just sort of brings to life the books or the podcast or just different resources. Well, it's been great talking with you, and I know that you're a wealth of information, JoAnn. So thanks so much for joining us today. I know we talked a lot about the remote practice, a little bit hybrid, but getting the most out of your remote office and building up those systems and things to consider. And for those who want to stay in touch with you and keep that conversation going, how can they find you?
I think the best way would be to, message me through LinkedIn. I'm frequently on LinkedIn and I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, JoAnn, for joining us. It's quite an honor to have you. I know we've been trying to get you on the podcast for a while, so I'm really grateful to have you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We also have the school community with the Power Up Your Practice, where we're building that community to help share resources about law practice management. And like JoAnn mentioned, the Power Up Your Practice book is available on Amazon. You can check it out. It is large, it is heavy, but we also have the Kindle version as well. And we like to keep, all of those concepts alive by by this podcast and all the great guests that we've been able to have over this last year and a half or so. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Up Your Practice Law Practice Management podcast. I'm your host, Ruby Powers, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review, tell someone else about us, and we'd love to get this podcast shared with others to reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive content, tips, and updates straight to your inbox. And exciting news, our book, The Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with strategies, 25 chapters, to help you elevate your practice and achieve your goals. So join us next week as we dive into more advice and insight on law practice management. We'll see you next time.